Welcome back to Management 720. Let's get started on Chapter 6. So in the last chapter, we discussed job costing and we discussed process costing, and we're going to be extending that discussion with activity-based costing. And so that's what we'll cover today. Now, activity-based costing in this particular chapter has sort of three different implementations. You can see in Learning Objective 3, there's a plant-wide version, a department version, and a full activity-based costing, and we'll discuss all this. The actual amount of new calculations that we have are not that much. This chapter is more leaning towards knowledge or definition based. And so these first two learning objectives are just setting up the reason or setting up the case for having activity-based costing. So this first learning objective just says that over the years, costing as a concept has grown to be a more complex situation. So in the early industrial era, products had longer life cycles, volumes were consistent, and typically you had more labor-based production, and therefore overhead was a smaller part of the overall cost. And you had limited number of products inside of each factory, and of those products, they had limited variance. As time went on, companies started to invest more in equipment, the whole transition towards fixed cost away from variable costs. And so you were basically moving products between a lot of different machines. So scheduling and movement of material was a bigger part of the production cycle. Overhead increased as part of the overall costs. So what does that mean? Well, in the last chapter, we looked at job costing and process costing, and in truth, activity-based costing is just an extension of job costing. Activity-based costing is just a response to where, because there are more machines and the production cycle is more complex, having more products and more variance, it just has increased the amount of complexity. So increased complexity requires a more sophisticated costing. But job costing and activity-based costing are related. Activity-based costing is just a more sophisticated version of job costing. So if job costing is if ABC costing is an extension of job costing, well, what does that mean? Job costing, we were dealing with the predetermined overhead rate. And the first step in that was to select a cost driver, some sort of proxy for manufacturing overhead that allowed us to cost objects or cost items in real time, because sometimes manufacturing overhead, the actual total cost, didn't come in for some time later. All ABC has said is, well, rather than base it on one type of cost driver, whether it's machine hours or labor hours or some other thing, ABC recognizes that a lot of production is more complex than that. More things are driving it than just one reliable cost driver. So ABC has multiple cost driver. So what's an example? If we're building a house, we could say maybe our best cost driver for how expensive or how costly a house is from the builder's point of view is the square footage. And that just is all encompassing. Okay, the bigger, that makes sense. And it's not a wrong cost driver, but it may not be completely accurate. For example, some things in a house are costly, but are not really derived from square footage. And the good example is if you have the same size house, but it has one bathroom and another house has two bathrooms, well, within a house outside the kitchen, now most houses just have one kitchen, but can have different numbers of bathrooms. So if you say two houses have the same square footage, but one has one bathroom, one has two bathrooms, just doing the cost based on square footage is going to come up with the same cost for both houses, when you know that a bathroom is a big cost of building a house. So maybe you say, well, we will do it on two things. We'll do part of the cost on the square footage, and we'll do part of the cost on how many bathrooms. And you could even extend that one additional level. And you say, okay, in addition to bathrooms and square footage, Houses are on different size pieces of property, kind of driving the landscaping. So maybe you come up with 3 cost drivers and say, we're going to base our costing on square footage, the number of bathrooms, and the size of the lawn, and say that these 3 things, when taken together, give us a more accurate picture of the cost by house rather if we just went with one simple cost driver such as just the square footage. So that's what ABC costing is at its basis, just recognizing that different things drive the costs, and no one single cost driver is the most accurate. And the whole idea of ABC costing is to be more accurate with your costing, therefore we can be more accurate with our pricing. So here in Learning Objective 3, we're going to go through the 3 different types of activity-based costing, from plant-wide, department, and then full-on activity-based costing. And they are sort of in increasing levels of complexity. Remember, in last chapter, we had job costing, which was essentially one type of product and one cost driver. So here, the first level of kind of basic complexity is a plant-wide rate. And what it's suggesting is that perhaps you can see we've got oat milk, we've got 2 different products. We've got oat milk and soy milk. And what ends up happening is that the different products use machine hours. We still have one resource here. We have machine hours, but they use these resources at a different rate, or they use for example, the oat milk only requires 3 machine hours and soy milk only requires 2 machine hours. So if we were to cost these at just one rate, we wouldn't be, I guess, identifying the fact that one uses our resources more than the other. So what we do is we break it down by product. They're both using machine hours, just one uses a little bit more than the other. So therefore, you can see what comes out would be the total unit cost of oat milk is $6.10. The total unit cost of soy milk is $400. And if I were to go through the exercise and just consider them as one product, the cost would be somewhere in the middle. It'd be something like $500. And that would mean that we would have overcosted soy milk and maybe charged too much, and we would have undercosted oat milk and not charged enough. So the first sort of level of complexity is still one cost driver, but perhaps we've got 2 different types of products that use that one resource at a different rate. The second one is we have, instead of looking at it by 2 products, we still have it by product, but we're now adding, perhaps they go through 2 different stages. They go through 2 different departments. And each of these departments uses a different type of cost driver. Let's say the blending for this particular thing, we're still looking at oat milk and soy milk. Let's say the blender uses direct labor hours because it's more of a labor intensive process. And packaging uses machine hours because it's more of a machine intensive. So if we were to use machine hours for both of these, we might not actually get an accurate cost of how much each of these 2 products are using the different types of activities. So we are still going to, I guess an important point is to remember that no matter which of these methods we use, we're still going to be using the same overall total overhead. We're just going to be breaking it up into different buckets, and each bucket may have its own cost driver or it may have its own rate. And so we just have to be mindful. For example, here you can see, because blending is based on labor hours, we're going to be dividing by the total number of labor hours for the dollars and measuring it on a per labor hour basis for things in blending. Here, because packaging is based upon machine hours, we're going to be dividing the amount of dollars in the packaging department by the machine hours. So we will have 2 different rates for the 2 different activities. So when we go through here, and it's also important to remember, all of this activity, just like in the last chapter, we're mostly focusing on figuring out what's the overhead. We still have to add in the direct materials and direct labor to get the total cost. So here, manufacturing for oat milk, they required a certain amount of labor hours. For the blending, a certain amount of packaging hours. And so each of them have a slightly different rate for the labor and machine hours, and we just apply the rate by product and by department. And so this would be a step up from the plant-wide. And also, I understand these are just sort of representations so you can see the type of information you're provided for and get an idea. You'll get a better concept of it when we go through the homework questions and you can see actually working through the numbers. Plus, I have an example here in just a moment. And last, we have a full-on activity-based costing system. Basically, where we have identified a number of activities. Each activity has its own cost pool. In other words, we're going to divide up the total overhead cost and put it in these buckets. We call these buckets cost pools, and each cost pool will have its own driver. So you can see here are the activities on this side, and they each have a certain amount of dollars. In other words, the total, if we went back and looked, the total amount of overhead is still 187. We've just divided up amongst a bunch of different activities. So blending, packaging, receiving, inventory control, all these different things, but their cost driver are based upon different things. So here, blending is based on labor hours, packaging is based on machine hours. We know the total quantity, and we can figure out blending is $50 per labor hour. Packaging is $131.25 per machine hour, and so on and so forth. So we can say inventory control is based upon units produced, 632 units. It's going to be $20.57. So we can go through and we can figure out costing a little more accurately by breaking it down into the activities. Now the question is going to come up, and we'll address it later on. How far do you want to break it down? Well, you only want to go but so far as cost benefits. You don't need in other words, if you don't get any extra analysis or if you don't get any extra cost accuracy after 6 cost pools, there's no reason to go to 10, because that's just extra time and energy trying to measure 10 when 6 may be just as accurate as 10. Okay. Let's take a look now at an example. And this example is from the book, and the answers are in the book, but they don't show you how to work the answers. So I'm going to work them all out for you. So here we've got a bunch of information, and the idea is that we want to go ahead and figure out the costs for these 2 products, Cobra Latch and Grimlock. I don't know what they're doing. Maybe they're locks. And then do it on the basis of a plant-wide, a department, and an activity-based costing, and show how the different ones do a little differently. And I'll just say ahead of time, I think they could have done a better job with this example, because there's a few little things that don't demonstrate all the things they need to, but it's a good sort of process to say, hey, here's a bunch of information. What information do I need to focus on? Well, let's first start off with plant-wide. Let me see, where am I? Now remember, plant-wide uses one cost driver, and even if you have remember we had soy milk and oat milk, but it was just machine hours. Well, here's the same thing. So we says it's assumed the cost per unit of activity given between departments. Okay. They want to evaluate their product mix strategy regarding 2 of its 5 products. So these are just 2 of 5 products. The company has been using a plant-wide overhead rate based upon machine hours. Okay, so plant-wide is machine hours, but is considering switching to either a department rate, because we've got 2 departments, fabrication and finishing, or a complete full-on activity-based rate. Now you can see we've got 4 activities, 1, 2, 3, 4. So either 2 departments, start off with what is the plant-wide rate based upon machine hours, or a department rate based upon 2 departments, or an activity-based costing based upon 4 activities. So we're going to look at what is the cost per unit under each of these 3 models. So if we were to take the plant-wide rate, and it's based upon machine hours, well, what is our total overhead? And that's going to be these 2 numbers right here, 120 plus 55. So it's going to be a total of 175, And how many total machine hours do we have? If I were to look here, the two amounts for the two departments use a total of 15,000 machine hours. So if I divide that out, that looks like that's going to come to an awkward number. $75 divided by 15. Oh no, that looks fine. So 175. There we go. 175 divided by 15 is going to be 11.67 repeating. So we'll just call that 1167. Okay, so if I were to then go and look at how many, if I wanted to cost out based upon just machine hours, if I said Cobra has how many machine hours? 500 and 200. So 500 plus 200 equals 700 hours times 11.67. $700 times 11.67 equals 8,169. But remember, this is just the overhead costs. We also have to add in, we've got 12,000 for the direct materials and 5,000 for the direct labor. So those together are going to be plus 17,000. So it's going to be 25,169. And there it says here we do them in batches of 100 units. So therefore we're going to divide that by 100. So the per price here is going to be divided by 100 is going to be $251.69. So this is the plant-wide cost. And we'll do the same thing here. So for Grimm, we have 700 plus 100, so 800 total hours times 11.67, and then that's going to come up to 9,336, plus it has another 22,000 here. You can see 18,000 and 4,000, so that's another 22,000. Equals 31,336 divided by a batch of 100. That means it's per unit cost under plant-wide. It's $313.36. Okay, so just remember though, if we look up here, all we've done is take this 120 and 55,000, right? This $175,000 of overhead, and tried to figure out a way to accurately divide the costs up. Now, of course, the direct material and direct labor are known. What we're really focusing on are the other, this is direct materials plus direct labor. What we're focusing on is how are we splitting up this overhead? And so the first way we've done it is just use one cost driver, machine hours. So what if we used the second cost driver? So now this is going to be the department. So we have two departments, and we have the fabrication department. What is the total amount of money in the fabrication department is 120. So in the fab department, it's going to be 120K. In the finishing department, it's going to be total of 55,000. Again, you see all we've done is up here, we said all of the overhead divided by machine hours. Here we're saying, okay, we've got two different departments, so we're dividing up that 175 between the two departments. And let me read here. I think this is one of the things that I thought was a little odd about this one. Typically, when we divide up in departments, each department uses a different cost driver. But it looks like they're going to use machine hours for both of these. It doesn't explicitly say, but let's go ahead and calculate it out. I think I did this yesterday, and I remember it came out that way. So here, how many machine hours are used in the fabrication department? Well, machine hours are 10,000. So what we're doing here is our rate for the fabrication department is going to be $12 per machine hour. And this one's 55 divided by 5 equals 11. Now, again, that's one of the kind of shortcomings of this particular example is typically when you divide up a department, the department rates are going to be pretty different, therefore giving you a much better accurate cost. Because they're not so different, we may not end up get much of a difference from just our plant-wide rate. So if we go ahead and figure this out, again, we're going to be doing the Cobra is going to be doing the 12,000 plus 5,000, right? So the 17,000 of direct materials and direct labor plus, now notice here, the machine hours in fabrication is 500. So 17,000 plus 500 hours in fabrication at a rate of 12 and 200 at a rate of 11. Yeah, so we're not really going to see much of a difference here. And Grimm is going to be the same. It's going to be the 22,000 in materials and labor plus 700 times the fabrication rate, which is 12, and then 100 times 11. 100 times 11. So let me go ahead and calculate those out. And so what we end up with is when I have taken the direct materials and direct labor cost, and then I take the hours in fabrication times the fabrication rate, the hours in finishing times the finishing rate, and extended the numbers, I come up with a total cost of $252,000 divided by a batch of 100, meaning each item is $252. Now notice under the plant-wide rate, we're within $1. Same here over on the Grimlock side. I have the direct materials and direct labor at 22,000, right? The 18 plus 4. And then I extended it. It had 700 hours in fabrication at a rate of $12 per hour and 100 hours in finishing at a rate of $11 per hour. And so what you end up coming with is a 315,000 divided by a batch of 100, or 315. Again, within $2. So because the fabrication machine hour rate and the finishing machine hour rate it ends up that the difference between the plant and the department is not that big. Well, let's go ahead and finish off and take a look at what is going to be our activity-based costing rate. So here we've got 4 different rates. We've got the maintenance, materials handling, machine setup, and inspections. And you'll notice down here that we have those. So we can go ahead and figure out how much these are. Okay, so working out the rates for each activity. Remember, that's what activity-based costing is we have 4 rates. Each of them have a certain amount of dollars in the activity, and they have a certain amount of the activity volume. So here, maintenance is $20 and $20,000 and $10,000, so it's $30,000. And how many machine hours are involved? A total of 15. So it's a $2 per machine hour. And we go through and do the same thing with all the other ones. Material handling is total between the two departments is 45,000. The number of moves is 4,500. And so it's $10 per move. Setups are $75,000. There's less than 1,000. It's 75, so 0.75. So it's $100 per machine setup. And then inspection hours is 25,000 divided by 1,000, or $25. And what we do is we go through and we apply these activities to each of these activity rates to both of these products. So we have Cobra, we have Grimm, and so again we have to have the total direct materials, so the direct materials and the direct labor. are going to be coming out to 17,000. And for Grimm, it's going to be 18,000. And then when we do the machine hours, it is going to be 1,200. So the machine hours are going to be 1,200 times $2 an hour, or 2,400. Well, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong way. It's for Cobra Latch, it is 5 plus 2. It is 700 hours times 2, which is 1,400. For moves, for the material moves, it is going to be 30 times $10, or 300. And then for setup, and we're kind of running out of paper, it's going to be 5 setups times $100 equals $500. And then for inspections, it's going to be 30 inspections at a rate of $25 a piece. And that is, let me go ahead and add these all together. So essentially, we've got the Cobra, which has 17,000, right? 12 and 5. And then we went through each activity. We went through the total machine hours, 700 machine hours times $2 a machine hour, 30 material moves times $10 a move, 5 setups times $100 a setup, 30 inspections times $25 inspection. We add these all up. It came to $199,500 divided by a batch of 100 says that the cost per unit is $199.50. Now look at how much significantly different that is. I mean, that's more than $50 different than the plant-wide and the department-wide. And the more activities you evaluate, the more accurate your cost is going to be. And so this cost, it's I don't want to say it's a different cost, it's a more accurate cost. And so by doing the activities, we actually gain a lot of information going from plant-wide and the department to the activity. If we do it on the Grimlock, I wrote 18,000 here, but it's actually 18 plus 4. So 22,000, and we did the same thing. We said 7 plus 100 machine hours, so 800 machine hours times $2 machine hour is 1,600. We said 15 moves times $10 a move is 500. 9 machine setups times $100 a piece is 900. 60 inspection hours times $25 is 1,500. So that came to a total of $265,000 of cost divided by 100 says it's $265. And even that is $50 again, $50 difference. Now, why is it so big? Now, the only thing I can think of is notice here that it says, where does it say? It says 2 of 5 models right there. So what could have been happening under the plant-wide rate and the department rate was we were overpricing these two products and underpricing the other products, meaning these two products were subsidizing. And what we're finding out is perhaps these products are they cost less and therefore could be much more profitable. So the outcome by doing additional, more accurate costing allows us to price this radically different. Imagine if you knew your product on the cost side was $50 less than what you thought. That's going to change your pricing strategy a whole lot for both of these items. So there was not much difference between the plant-wide and the department-wide, and you may think to yourself, stop right there, but it could just be an artifact of the type of cost drivers involved. when you go to a little bit more accurate costing with activity-based costing, you end up coming with a very interesting change of events where your costing is a lot more accurate, and you find out, at least for these two products, it's a lot lower. So therefore, the cost for the other products are a lot higher, meaning you're losing margin on the other products here, on the other products, because they are undercosted. Anyway, so not 100%, I guess this example could be better, but at least it demonstrates some of the ideas and how to approach each of the different types of costing. Well, let's go ahead and continue on. All right, so these next couple of learning objectives are more just informational. All of the big calculation is basically in learning objective 3, where we go over the 3 different types: plant-wide, department, and activity-based costing. So a little extra information about ABC implementation is that, remember, and a lot of times accountants forget this, and as MBA managers, you're going to have to keep this in mind. The costing is just the first part of the answer. That's a quantitative answer, but that's not always taking everything into the big picture. There could be other quantitative items such as marketing costs or distribution costs. There could be non-quantitative, qualitative things as what's the level of customer service. Another idea is that sometimes you have to be aware of what the practical versus the total capacity is of your plant. Remember that the total capacity sometimes does not take into account the downtime needed for maintenance and for setups and that sort of thing. And of course, we're investigating the idea of costs of setups and inspections, and sometimes those additional activities take away from a total capacity. And as you saw when we went through the example, that we came up with a drastically, it went from $250, essentially $250 to $200. And so, that's a drop of, 1/5. And so, a drop in now nothing has changed in the factory. You just realize that that one of those products actually costs you 20% less to make than you thought it did originally. And so that could lead to a new product mix. There could be additional changes in how you market things or price things. So just be aware that the production costing, the activity-based costing, is just the first step in an overall decision. Now, we talked a little bit about cost drivers and how many should you have. Now, we went from essentially one overall plant-wide rate to 2 departments with the same cost driver. And we didn't really get better information until we went to 4 activity. Now, is the question with the last example, the question is, will we get even more accuracy, more dramatic accuracy by going to 6 or 8 or 10 cost drivers? No, there's going to be some point of inflection to where the cost benefit says we don't get any extra accuracy, but it's still we're still tracking a whole bunch of things. Just realize tracking and measuring these activities takes time and it costs money. So you want to have the minimum amount of cost drivers and cost pools necessary to get your most accurate result. And so there's going to be a trade-off between, adding one additional cost driver and cost pool and the tracking involved versus whether or not it gives you, if it gives you 1% extra accuracy, is that really worth it if it costs a whole lot more money? So there's going to be some inflection point where you say, this is the right number of cost drivers and cost pools for our particular production process. And I found in my experience, it's between like 4 and 7, somewhere along there because once you get into more, not to say there aren't much more complex, but then you're going to be running into maybe breaking down those production chains into more discrete units to focus better. So another question is, you may want to track something, but you may not have the ability. A lot of times there's things where you have to come up with new methods or you have to change your whole process just to be able to track something that you think is important. So just realize that these are additional parts of implementing activity-based costing and making the decision about how many cost pools, cost drivers that you want to do. We can also use activity-based costing as a way to determine customer profitability. So you may be selling a product or a service to a customer, but there's a whole bunch of other things that go along with servicing a customer that you may not realize are making some customers more profitable than others. And this is kind of an interesting tactic, and I've included one homework question that kind of shows this just to give us an idea. It's not really a whole lot of information here just because it's I don't want to say it's intuitive, but you will see when we go to the homework question, it's kind of based upon the type of product or service you're selling and what are the extra add-on services that you're doing for the customer that the customer may come to expect and maybe sometimes overuse, and those are costs that you need to keep track of. So if you are constantly having service calls or additional customer visits, now a lot of times those are kind of necessary. There's a minimum number of visits you need to do, but if the customer is always calling you out, if billing and collection with the customer is kind of awkward or you're always following up, those are additional costs. How many service calls you're receiving from them? Do they do orders that are big and consolidated, or do they do a myriad of small orders to satisfy something on their end that helps them do things? Processing a bunch of small orders is more costly than processing fewer bigger orders. And there could be additional things they're asking for, particular product processing. Now, again, depending upon the service or the type of product you're dealing, there could be all different types of services that you're doing in addition. But the idea is that you want to look at these extra add-on things to see if some customers are more profitable or to identify if there are some cost sinks in your process. The last learning objective before we move on to homework is just an extension of activity-based costing to something called activity-based management. With the activity-based costing, what we're basically doing is we're learning more about our process and tracking more things to give us a better and clearer and more accurate cost. So what do? The result is you learn more about your production process, and you may come to find out there are some activities in your process that are very costly, and perhaps you could substitute other types of processes to be more efficient, to be more effective, to be more cost effective. And you may choose to disregard some lines just because there's no way to improve them. You could also figure out that you could extend some other products and address new customer areas. So activity-based management, I guess I should say, activity-based costing is taking the existing process and just figuring out what's the most accurate, cost-effective picture. Activity-based management then takes the bigger picture and saying, well, do I have to have all these activities? Could I add activities? Could I substitute activities? Could I do something else? In other words, take the activities not as a given, but as choices in your production process, and maybe you could do things differently. So management is making the choice about activities, whereas activity-based costing is just optimizing existing activities. And there's a lot of acronyms out there. ABM is just another one of them, but it could help you. And I've said here, it could give you a better view of your extended value chain, and it could affect, if you say what we really need to do is substitute this activity, that could spur R&D to be looking at a different thing that could be much more value intensive. And so it could help your overall picture on how you run things. Okay, I think from here we're going to take a look at homework. So what I've done with the homework is I've actually put all of the knowledge-based multiple choice questions in the front, and so it's the back, the later questions that are all the calculation questions. And I've also tried in general to shift the type of calculation questions where the easier ones are early and they progressively get a little bit more complex and difficult. So let's go ahead and take a look at these, and we'll start off with number 7, which is a simple activity. Okay, our first one is question number 7. Assume the total cost of the setup activity cost pool are $72,000. 50 setups were completed in June. Further assume that during June, machines were set up 10 times to make product K12. So I guess part of these questions, I'm choosing these questions to see how closely or how useful they are going to be in the exam. So some of these are going to be more useful in exam settings than others. So something like this is probably going to be something like a C-level question because it's just the basic idea of activity-based costing. The fact that we have 72,000 divided by 50 setups. So how much is it per setup? So it's going to be 72,000 divided by 50 setups. It is a $1,440 per setup. And assuming the during June machines were set up 10 times to make product K12, what is the total setup cost? Well, if it's 1,440 per setup and there were 10 setups, you can see it's just going to be 14,400. Now, that's a very simple, straightforward question, but it does get at the basics of do you understand the idea of activities and per activity costs. So the next one we're going to go to is 8. This one is sort of a plant-wide rate. So has 2 products, resistors and transistors in a small manufacturing plant, which has a total overhead of 25,000 June and used 300 direct labor hours. Factory has 2 departments, which incurred 12,000 of manufacturing overhead. The production, which incurred 13,200. Now notice though that the 12,000 and the 13,200 are the total overhead. All we've done is split it up between 2 departments. Design used 200 hours of direct labor and production used 80 machine hours. During June, 150 direct labor hours were used in making. So a bunch of information, right? If Deca Electronics uses a plant-wide rate based upon labor hours to assign manufacturing costs to the products, the total manufacturing overhead assigned to each unit of resistors and transistors were what? So gives you a lot of information, but realize all we're looking at is the total amount of overhead, 25,200, divided by what is the total labor. Says total is 150 for resistors and 150 for transmitters. So divided by 300 total labor hours equals let's see, 25,200 divided by 300 equals $84, and each of them so we have $252,000 divided by 300 direct labor hours, because direct labor hours is what we're doing. So it's $84 per direct labor hour. And it's kind of a strange question, but each of these use 150 direct labor hours to make 100 units, and same for both of them. So if we say times 150 labor hours, that's going to come to 12,600, and that's for 100 units. So each unit would be $126, and it would be the same for both of them. So let's see, 126 looks good. Okay, number 9 is going to be it looks like it's the same one with slightly different numbers, right? Slightly different numbers. And it's now asking you, it says, if it uses a department rate based on direct labor hours for the design department and machine hours for the production department, the department overhead rates for design production. Okay, so here we're having, so they want a rate for each of the departments, and each of the departments uses a different cost driver. So design, which had 14,000, and it says design was based upon machine hours. let's see, design. Oh, direct labor hours for design. Direct labor hours for design. So design had 14,000. Had $14,000, and it's based upon direct labor hours, and design used 200 hours. So that looks like that's going to be $70 per. And the production had $15,400, and they used 80 machine hours. Let's see what that is. 15,400 divided by 80 equals 192.5. Do we have that? Do we have 70 and 192? It looks like we do. Okay. Number 10. Has 3 activity pools which have the following costs. The activity drivers are 100 setups, 220 moves, and 175 machine hours. Product V4 used the following quantity of the activity drivers produce 100 units. Okay, so we've got 3 pools. We've got setups. Which is going to be 21,000 divided by 100 setups. So was that $210? Material moves are going to be 30,800 divided by 220 moves equals, let me see what that is, $140. And the last one is going to be machine hours. And that's going to be 19,600 divided by 175 machine hours. Equals 112 per machine hour. And V4 used 12 of these, 20 of those, and 32 of those. So you can see all we have to do is extend these. When I say extend, I just mean multiply out. So 210 times 12 when I add them all together, $89.04. And that is for 100 units. So 89.04 per unit. Oh, I guess they want both of them. They want the total cost and per unit, which is the same number, just divided. Okay, so that was correct. Let's move on to number 11. Number 11 is about activity costs. The company produces 2 products, A and B. Relating to the 2 products follow, units produced, a bunch of stuff. The following total costs are reported. Setup costs assigned to B are. So I think I assigned this question to make you realize you're always going to be overloaded. A lot of times you're going to be overloaded with information. Just make sure you understand what the question is, because you can a lot of times skip a lot of heartache by just, if they're only asking you for part of the question or part of the total process, then you don't have to do everything. So it says setup cost assigned to B. Okay, so setups, right? So what are the total amount of setups here? The total amount of setups are 7 plus 5, which is 12,000 setups, divided by how much are or not divided into. The total cost for the setups are 420,000 divided by 12,000 total setups. So 420 divided by 12 equals $35 per setup, right? And B had 7,000 setups. So 35 times 7,000 equals 245,000. Is that a number? It is. So you can see you could maybe, if you didn't look at what the question was asking for, you could end up having done a whole lot more work than necessary. It was really only asking us to figure out the rate for setups by taking the total amount of setup dollars divided by the total amount of setups. And then that's the rate, which ended up being 35. And then specifically just for B, what was the setup cost? Well, I'm talking big game, but let's see if I'm actually right. Okay. Now we can talk big game. Okay, that's number 11. So hopefully up to this point, you've seen that I've selected questions. Now, I may not have this much information on the exam, but they're fairly specific and straightforward as far as what they're asking for and how to get the answer. So that's what you should be focusing on. Number 12, two-stage ABC. I don't know why they even call it two-stage. It's just ABC. Meridian has determined its activity, cost pools, and cost drivers to be the following. So we have the dollar amounts. We have what is the activity by cost driver. One product made by Meridian metal casements use the following activities. So they had this many. Calculate the cost per unit activity, each cost per. So this is kind of a step-by-step. So all we're doing is 350,000 divided by 350. Material handling is 12,800 divided by 640. Material operation is 280,000 divided by machine operation divided by of 280,000. I misread it. Divided by 20,000 machine hours is 14. And packing is 30,000 divided by packing orders of 1,200. Then it says calculate the manufacturing overhead cost per metal casement. So we want a per item. So metal casement used 20 of these $1,000 setups. Is that right? Did I do that right? 35,000 divided by 350 equals 100. Okay. No, I'm sorry. 100. I was thinking that number was too big. So 20 setups times, so we'll do 20 setups times $100 per setup. That's going to be $2,000. Then $20 times the material moves is going to be $1,600. 14 times machine hours, where I'm going to have to use the old calculator. 26,600. That seems like a lot of machine hours. Packing orders is 150 times 25. I'm just, my cost accountant brain is starting working. I'm like, this is what's actually driving the cost, right? The machine hours. 30, you can see the majority of the costs are in machine hours, which is a little strange. Plus, add those together. Equals 33,950. And for there are 500 units, so we divide this by 500. Equals $67.90. I'm actually not, I feel like I fat fingered something here, but let's check. Oh, I guess I didn't. So that's how you would go about this question. Number 13. Okay, so this is a good question to kind of make you realize it really depends on what you choose as your activity driver, because it could give you very different looks at your costs. And so from an MBA management point of view, so, the cost accountant, the person working for you who's the accountant, is just going to run the numbers according to how you suggest. But you as the manager have to have a little bit better intuition, a little bit understanding of the process to realize what is actually driving, what is the cost driver driving each department. And this is just sort of set up to show if you pick the wrong cost driver, you could come up with some wonky numbers. So here we've got some overhead rates. In the milling department, grooves are cut into the aluminum. Okay, the rods are individual. Calculate the plant-wide manufacturing overhead rate using machine hours. So we're going to do a plant-wide based on machine hours. Then we're going to do a plant-wide on direct labor hours. And then we're going to have two other versions. Calculate department rates using machine hours for milling and direct labor hours in finishing. And then the reverse, direct labor hours in milling and machine hours in finishing. So this is going to give us kind of a bunch of different answers. Okay, so the plant-wide rate using machine hours. Well, what is the total machine hours? It's 11,000 machine hours, right? And what are the total costs? It's going to be the 280 plus the 115. So 280, 800 plus 115, 200 equals 396,000 divided by 11,000. Ends up being, if we just use the one rate, one cost driver, machine hours, it ends up being $36 per machine hour. If we instead choose to use direct labor hours, well, it's still going to be the 396 because that's the total overhead. But instead, we're going to use 2,000 labor hours. And you can see that's going to give us the same, whereas you can see the machine hours gives us a vastly different usage rate in the departments, whereas labor hours is the same. So labor hours is not a very good usage. I mean, the plant-wide rate is not good in general, but this one's not going to give us any differentiation between the departments by using this one. Using machine hours, that'll give us a pretty big differentiation. So anyway, let's go through with the process. So 396,000 divided by 2,000 is going to be $198 by labor hour, by direct labor hour. We don't have a partial check here. Okay, calculate the department overhead rates using machine hours in milling and direct labor hours in finishing as the allocation basis. Okay, so here, I'm trying to keep all the information on the screen. What is the total amount in milling? So we're going to have 280,800 in milling, and the first one says use machine hours for milling. And labor hours for finishing. So 280,800 divided by 11,000 equals 2553. What is it saying about rounding? No, that's not right. Let's see. 280,000. Oh, only 9,000 used in that department. So 280,800 divided by 9,000 equals 31.2. And then finishing department is going to be 115,200 divided by 1,000 hours of labor. So that's just going to be 115.2. If we do it the other way, we're going to do direct labor hours for milling. So direct labor hours for milling, they had 1,000 hours of direct labor hours. So that's going to be 280,800 divided by 1,000, or it's going to be 280 and 80 cents. And then it's going to be, if we used machine hours for finishing department, that's for the finishing department, that's going to be 115,200 divided by 2,000 machine hours. So 115,200 divided by 2,000 equals 57.6. Now, of course, when we run these numbers, well, let's just double check, make sure they're right. That the idea is that you want to pick the one that is using a certain resource more. Now, in the labor hours and milling and finishing, it doesn't seem like either one is using particularly a whole lot of resources. But you notice definitely the difference between milling and finishing is one is using a lot more of the resources than the other. So you may choose to use machine hours for both of them, or, it would have been nice, again, if the question had been if labor hours and milling was like 200 and finishing was 1,000, then you would say finishing on average uses more labor hours, milling proportionally uses more machine hours, and that would give you the idea to break up. That's how you would break apart your analysis. You would choose the cost driver for the department for the resource that it uses a lot of, and therefore would be a better breakdown of the costs. Okay, the last one, or not quite the last one. We've got number 14, activity-based costing. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, sorry, I'm back. I got called away for a second. So yeah, this question, just reading again, it's a little bit wonky. It's a little wonkier than I thought when I first assigned it. Essentially, we've got two different things. We've got to calculate it based upon direct labor hours, and then we have to do the calculation again based upon activity-based costing. Let me put this in the preview format so I can see it a little better. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one, based on direct labor hours. So the first question is total cost. So what is the total cost? Well, this is the total manufacturing overhead, right? And then this is the direct materials, and then this is the direct labor. So the total cost is going to be the same for both of these. It's just how do we divide up the manufacturing overhead between the gas cooker and the smoker, and that will give us a different per unit price depending upon the method we're using. So if we add those together, let's see, we've got 333,600 plus these two together are 50,000. Plus these two together, 129,000 equals 512,600. So that's the total cost for both of them. Then just depending upon how we assign overhead, the per unit cost ends up being a little differently. So if we do it on the basis of direct labor dollars, we're basically going to take the 333,600 total overhead divided by the total number of, okay, it's not even direct labor hours, it's direct labor dollars. So the total labor dollars is 20 plus 29, or 49,000. So if we do 333,600 divided by 49,000 equals 6.808. I got a long number. Aha. So that's the number I get when I divide those two out. And look, use this number. Okay, so we got the right number, 6.8082 for overhead rate calculations. Okay, so based on the basis of direct labor dollars. So what were the direct labor dollars here for the cooker? It's going to be $20,000 times a rate of 6.8082, and that's going to give us 136,164, and that's the amount of overhead. That's the amount of this $333,000 that's overhead. But we have to add in the direct materials and direct labor as well. That's 50,000, 30 plus the 20. So this is going to be 186,164, and it's 4,000 units divided by 1,000 units. So that's going to be $186.16. I don't think they want us to round up. I think they just want us to round. Anyway, we'll give that a try. The next one, the smoker, is going to be 29,000. And don't be sort of weirded out that we're using a dollar amount to figure out another dollar amount. All it is a unit of tracking that we're using. So for every dollar of labor, we're saying there's another $6.80 of overhead. So every direct labor dollar, there's an additional $6.80 of overhead. That's all we're really using the number for. So 29,000 times 6.8082 equals 197,437.8. And then we add in 129,000 for the direct materials. And so this is the overhead, this is the direct materials and direct labor. Equals 326,437.80. But this one has 3,000 units in a batch. So divide that by 3,000 equals 108.81, I guess. So those are my two numbers for that. Kind of odd numbers. 186.16 and 108.81. Okay. So it's too bad we can't check it sort of midway. Well, we'll figure out if our crazy numbers works. Now, the second way we're going to do is by activity-based costing. And there are three activities. There's materials acquisition, there's material movements, and scheduling. And they're based upon, the first one's based upon direct materials cost. So let's figure out our rate for each activity. So our rate for this first activity is 299,000 divided by the total amount of direct materials. The direct materials is 130,000. And that's going to be I didn't think it'd come out to a round number, but it does. $2. So basically we're saying this activity is for every dollar of direct materials, there's an extra $2.30 that goes into acquisition and inspection. Okay. So materials movements, there's $16,600 in that. And how many moves are there? There's 80 plus 20. And you notice that they don't put them in order. They're trying to catch you, right? This one's the second one on this list, but this one's third on this list. So just make sure you're matching them up correctly. Batch moves are 80 plus 20, 100. So that would be $166. For every batch move, there's another $166 goes into the movement. And scheduling is going to be $18,000 divided by, well, let's see, number of batches is 30. So 18,000 divided by 30 equals $600 per scheduling. Wow, scheduling takes $600. Again, it's just going to my accounting mind that seems like a lot for scheduling. But it's the numbers that we have. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to figure out, based upon these rates, the total cost for the cooker and the total cost for the smoker. So the cooker is going to come in at number of well, let's start off with the first one. The first one is number of direct materials. So the direct materials here is going to be $30,000 of direct materials times $2.30 per. The second one is number of batch moves. So the batch moves for the cooker is 80 batch moves times $166 per batch move. The next one is going to be number of batches, 20 batches times, and we said it was $600. And then we also have to have direct materials and the direct labor cost. So whatever we extend these out to plus 50,000. And then that's going to be divided by 1,000. So let's see. 30,000 times 2.3. 88 times 166. And now you see why we do all this stuff on spreadsheets. So plus the 50, plus the 13,200, oops, the 13,280, plus the 69. So that is 144,280 divided by 1,000 units. So that's going to be $144.28. So you see there's a pretty big difference between using just labor dollars, just one cost driver, versus using 3 cost drivers. We're getting a more accurate, a $40 difference, which is, it's going to be, it's around 20%. For the smoker, it's going to be 100,000. 100,000 times 2.3. It's going to be, what's the next one? 20 batch moves times 166. And it's going to be 10 batches times $600 plus the direct material and direct labor of 129,000. So let's figure these out. Comes to 368, 320 divided by 3,000 units, right? Equals 122.77. I don't know. I think I may have done something wrong here, but let's check. Oh, nope. Right on the money with all of them. I was figuring that this didn't look quite right, but I guess it did. So going from one cost driver to the second cost driver, we are under costing the charcoal smoker. It actually costs us more than we realize to make it. So therefore our pricing is wrong. And the gas cooker is a lot cheaper to make than we thought. And so we could be pricing it too high. So that's the kind of the takeaway from that. Okay, so close the preview. Let's look at the last one. The last one is not quite as dramatic. It's this, how do you evaluate a customer's activity? And it's basically using the same things that we have used so far, sort of this activity-based costing, but it seems a little, I like this question. It feels like a little bit more intuitive. So here we're trying to figure out the actual productivity of a certain customer, right? And so it says figure out the productivity. So the sales revenue here is $223,000. Cost of goods sold, well, we have that. It's $100,000, right? $100,000, $350. And the customer relations, and you can go through here and you can see Customer relations is $83 per customer month. And are we just talking about 1 month? So I guess this is 83. And you'll go through, and I'm just going to pause it here and fill in these numbers, but you can see like selling is 10 cents per sales dollar, accounting is $8 per order, warehousing is 65 cents per unit shipped, et cetera, et cetera. So you just use these rates times whatever the driver is to fill in everything here. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just go to the preview question and I'll just have it fill in the correct responses. So you can see the 223 is the sales revenue, the 100,035 is the cost of goods sold. Customer relations, $83 per customer, per customer per month. Number of customers is 40, so you would multiply 40 times 83. The selling expenses are 10 cents per sales dollar, so it's just 1/10 of this number, et cetera, et cetera. So you can go through and you can figure out this is how much you made from your customers. You know what your cost of goods sold, but if you have good activity-based costing, you can figure out what are these other activities that you're doing and what's the total cost to figure out your profitability. So I feel like this is a very useful application of activity-based costing that MBA students like to see. In any case, that should be it. That's all the questions I believe that we were going to cover all the way up through 15. All right. Thanks again. These questions hopefully are helpful. Hopefully the video is helpful to not only explain the concepts, but go through the more difficult questions. And as always, if you have any questions about the homework, please let me know. I'm here. Use me. I'm a good resource, at least so I've been told. All right. Thank you.